If you are Jewish and Zionist, to the far left, you're only the enemy. But if you're a black, gay, Latino Zionist, you're not merely the enemy, you're a traitor. And there's a special hatred reserved for traitors. Oh, can you do an impersonation of me? Have you?
Yes, I can. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ami's house here in Ritchie Torres' house.
Yeah.
Congressman Ritchie Torres representing the congressional 15th. You're our first politician on the show. So we are really happy to have you.
Is it a dubious distinction? Or?
No, it's a good distinction.
By the way, you have squatters' rights here in my house, so.
Amazing. Well, we're going to stay a couple days if that's cool with you.
Sure.
And you are a proud, unapologetic Zionist, which according to a lot of woke college kids makes you a straight white male. How do you feel about that?
When I was on social media, I once had a white person describe me as a white supremacist.
I love that.
And so I simply replied, "Have you ever seen a picture of me?" And then I thought about the Dave Chappelle. Like Dave Chappelle had a brilliant skit about a black white supremacist.
Yes.
And he was aware that he was a white supremacist, but he was unaware that he was black because he was blind. So he's the only black white supremacist I've ever met or heard of.
And what was the response? No response from a troll, probably.
There's no... Yeah. You know, I have a rule: I never reason with people who refuse to be reasoned with. So I simply mock the absurd instead of engaging it as a serious argument.
Right. And you make that distinction, like in the Twitter sphere especially, because I see you go at it on Twitter. You're happy to call people out in a very proud and unapologetic way. But like there's a difference between opponents who disagree and sort of enemies who don't have good faith. So that's,
exactly right.
You know?
Exactly right. And there's a special hatred for me, right? Like if you are Jewish and Zionist, to the far left, you're only the enemy. But if you're a black, gay, Latino Zionist, you're not merely the enemy, you're a traitor. And there's a special hatred reserved for traitors. So I feel like I face outsized animosity from the anti-Zionist extremes, not only because of what I believe, but because of who I am.
Well, with that special hatred, on the flip side comes a special love for you, especially from the Jewish community and the pro-Israel community in general. So I want to talk about that because, like, you love the Jews, we love you. We're like besties. It's the greatest thing ever to see your advocacy, and it's been incredible. And I just want to ask you, like, where is that rooted? Because right now, like, you see a lot of pro-Israel support on paper.
Yeah.
You see a lot of lip service, tacit support, and then amongst that, the range I would say in politics sometimes is pro-Israel support on paper, apathy towards Israel, and then actual hostility towards Israel. So where does your not only on-paper support of Israel on policy come in, but like your actual enthusiastic Zionism in which you will go above and beyond out there in public to advocate and profess your Zionism and be supportive? Where does that come from? Did you have like an Israeli nanny growing up who you're still close with that's like was amazing? Where does it come from?
I would attribute it first and foremost to my mother. Like she raised me to be an empathetic person, which I feel like in some sense predisposes me to philo-Semitism.
Right.
But I'll admit that I'm something of a improbable friend of both the Jewish people and the Jewish state because I come from a neighborhood in the Bronx where most of the people I knew were almost exclusively Latino or African American. I had no real engagement with the Jewish community, no real engagement with Judaism or Zionism. And so by the time I became an elected official in 2014, like I was a blank slate. I had no settled views on issues relating to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And then I was invited by the Jewish Community Relations Council to go on a delegation to Israel. It was the first time I had an opportunity to travel abroad. It was one of the most formative and transformative experiences of my life. You know, going to Yad Vashem, going to the Old City, going to Masada, going to the Gaza envelope. I remember speaking to the local mayor of Sderot, who said that the majority of his children struggle with post-traumatic stress because families like his live under the threat of relentless rocket fire. I remember seeing bus stops doubling as bomb shelters. And I thought to myself, imagine the sheer trauma of a 5-year-old Israeli child seeking refuge in a bomb shelter while sirens are going off and rockets are being fired and adults are panicking in a state of pandemonium. You know, in the Bronx, I have constituents who live in fear of bullets, gun violence. But no one in the Bronx, no one in America lives in fear of rockets. Like none of us worry that Mexico and Canada are going to fire thousands of rockets into American homes and communities. And so I feel like my first experience with Israel enabled me to have empathy not only for the Jewish people, but for the complex security situation confronting Israel, which is surrounded by hostile neighbors.
And so, like, when you walk through the halls of Congress and see such confusion about it, because it seems like you had a blank slate, why is that not more of a common experience in politics and in across our representation?
Look, I find that politicians and activists who have strong views on Israel, or the most critical views of Israel, many of them have actually never gone to Israel. Many of them refuse to travel to Israel.
Right.
I remember when I was when I had just won the Democratic nomination as a congressman, an organization by the name of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America sent out a DSA, sent out a questionnaire to city council candidates. It was about 15 pages, and the final page was a foreign policy section because the New York City Council has a major role in setting foreign policy.
You gotta like that signal.
But the foreign policy section only had 2 questions, and both of which were about Israel. Question number 1, do you pledge never to travel to Israel if elected to the city council? Question number 2, do you pledge to support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel? So in the democratic socialist worldview, it is morally permissible to travel to China, which is committing genocide against Uyghur Muslims, Russia, which invaded a sovereign nation state like Ukraine, Iran, which is the leading sponsor of terrorism in the world, North Korea, which is essentially a totalitarian state, but travel to the world's only Jewish state, that is strictly forbidden. And if that is not evidence of anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism, then I'm not sure what would be.
Well, yeah, speaking of these sort of fringes within the different factions politically, I feel like, amongst the Jewish voting bloc, you have your right-of-center Jews and your left-of-center Jews, and there was sort of this I told you so moment that felt like it happened a little bit after October 7th when we saw maybe far-left elements in our society and far-left groups advocating for Palestine instead of Israel taking that side, even in the wake of October 7th. And I feel like, a lot of Democratic Jews kind of feel stuck coming up on this election. You have Donald Trump getting out there saying what I think a lot of right-of-center Jews feel, if you're voting for a Democrat, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should have your head examined. If you're a Jewish person and you're voting Democrat, you should be ashamed of you. Like saying things like that. However, there's a lot of Jews who kind of feel stuck. I mean,
yeah. So what do you say to a Democrat who voted for Hillary in 2016 and then Biden, and now feels like in this election they have to choose between their democratic values and their Zionist values?
And do you feel stuck also in some sort of way or alone in your party?
I mean, I've had differences with the president, but I disagree with the premise. I do feel President Biden has been fundamentally pro-Israel. I mean, he was the first president to go to Israel in a time of war.
Right.
He sent not 1 but 2 carriers to the Mediterranean to deter the threats confronting Israel. And in mid-April, the collaboration that we saw between the United States and Israel in response to the Iranian drone attacks and missile attacks was, I thought, a remarkable triumph of the U.S.-Israel relationship that sent a powerful message to the world, that's demonstrated to the world the value of a U.S.-Israeli security umbrella in the Middle East. So there have been issues on which I've had disagreements with the president, but there's no doubt in my mind that he is fundamentally pro-Israel. There are elements of the far left that are vehemently anti-Israel, even anti-Semitic, and are intent on wiping Israel from the map. But those elements still remain the fringe rather than the mainstream of the party.
And so you're encouraged that your voice is more representative within the party than people holding up signs calling Bibi a war criminal or things like that. Like that's... Is it also... And what's the trajectory? I think people see the RNC and they see people... if you're watching and you see the RNC having, speaking about hostages and having hostage parents speak, would we see the same thing at the DNC? At a time, I would imagine we certainly would, but in that conversation that's going around the Jewish dining room table, or the pro-Israel dining room table, not just Jewish, but anyone who cares essentially about this issue or a lot about this issue.
Look, I feel like we have to think in terms of individuals rather than parties. Just like there are pro-Israel and anti-Israel Democrats, there are pro-Israel and anti-Israel Republicans. Tom Massey is an example of an anti-Israel Republican.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly, he voted against a resolution recognizing Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. In 2021, the only senator who was a stumbling block to Iron Dome was Rand Paul, who's a Republican. So I feel like the U.S.-Israel relationship faces challenges not only from the anti-Zionism of the far left, but also from the America First isolationism of the far right. That America First isolationism is no friend of the U.S.-Israel relationship. And even J.D. Vance, who's the poster child for isolationism, voted against the National Security Supplemental, which included about $25 billion in funding for Israel. So the reality is more complicated than the narratives that form in our imagination.
For sure. On that subject of the far-right isolationists on the Republican side and the anti-Zionists on the Democratic side on those sort of fringes, on the subject of Iran, which is like on our minds every second of every minute as we speak, an attack on Israel is imminent. What do you think they get wrong? Speak to the isolationist elements in the Republican Party and the anti-Zionists in the Democratic Party. What do they get wrong about taking for granted or not understanding or discounting the U.S.-Israel relationship and alliance?
Well, I mean, the U.S.-Israel relationship is part of American leadership in the world, right? Since the end of World War II, I think we've seen the emergence of a U.S.-led, rules-based liberal democratic order that has given us the most prosperous, peaceful world humanity's ever seen. Like in the past 8 to 9 decades, there have been no cataclysmic wars on the scale of the Napoleonic Wars of the 1900s, or the world wars of the 20th century, and that's not an accident. That's a consequence of American leadership in the world. For me, isolationism is the global equivalent of defunding the police. When you defund the police, the inevitable result is lawlessness, right? So if the United States and Israel were to withdraw from the world, you're creating a power vacuum that's going to be filled by nefarious actors like China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Like without Israel, Iran would dominate the Middle East. And Iran is the most destabilizing, destructive force in the Middle East. Wherever there is a failed state, whether it's Gaza or Lebanon or Iraq or Syria or Yemen, you have the tentacles of Iran. Like Iran specializes. Iran is the octopus, right? Iran specializes in destabilizing states from within, creating power vacuum, and then filling those power vacuums with proxies. It has a network of proxies that exists to terrorize and threaten Israel. But the situation would be much worse without the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Yeah, there is like this dangerous naivete, especially like I lean in a lot of ways libertarian on economics and things like that. But when it comes to foreign policy and when it comes to adversaries around the world, there's a dangerous naivete paired with a normalcy bias. It all happened before the worst things that have happened in the world. It's not going to happen again. Like there's this weird, dangerous naiveness that. You know, and Douglas Murray, I saw in an interview, was like, oh, you can be an isolationist if you want, but they always want to have it both ways. You know, they want America to withdraw, but they still want America on top, you know, and good luck with that, you know. But I find that
it's an impressive impersonation.
Yes. Who will protect the Jews?
Yeah. I also feel like in a world of cyber warfare, like what happens abroad does not stay abroad. Like everything's interconnected. Right. And the consequences of isolationism will come back to haunt the United States.
And why do you think politicians have had such a hard time making it crystal clear that Israel's fight against Iran is America's fight against Iran? It seems that it's something that we understand, but you don't hear that story.
It's not a charity case.
Look, I think the manner in which people form their beliefs is often visceral, not cerebral. And the other side has a viscerally appealing argument, right? The notion that the United States should simply mind its business and focus on our own needs and invest all our resources here at home. Like that is powerfully seductive. And it has a powerful emotional appeal. And so the case against isolationism, there's a cerebral case to be made, But at the emotional level, it can be a challenge to make it.
I remember reading about how post-World War I, there was such a PTSD to get involved in foreign conflicts because it took such a toll on the U.S. population that's why it took so long for the U.S. to get involved, legitimately involved in World War II. Yeah. I feel like we're in that same cycle of history right now. Post-Iraq and post these entanglements that were misguided, we are now like, keep us out of it, even if it's the right fight.
We have forgotten that American leadership in the world is the exception, not the rule, and that isolationism is deeply encoded in the American DNA. Remember George Washington in his farewell address that America should be suspicious of foreign entanglements.
Right.
We took an isolationist turn after World War I.
Yeah.
Even when Britain was threatened by the Nazis, we were largely standing by passively on the sidelines. It was not until we were invaded and attacked on Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
So it took an extraordinary provocation to overcome the isolationist impulse in American politics.
Yeah, there's a scene in The Darkest Hour, Winston Churchill, played by Gary Oldman. He's like, please, Franklin, please, we need you, please. I'm sorry, Winston, I just can't. But it was like this, I just feel like we're in that cycle of history right now where there's a lot of people in America saying, I'm sorry, Israel, we just can't. Great movie, Darkest Hour, yeah.
People are not so polite when saying no to Israel. But
Right now, exactly. I'm sorry, if only, if only.
Yeah. There was no FDR equivalent of Free Palestine from the river to the sea. So.
Yeah, exactly. But in general, also, there's this like weird animation by which people, in a way, want to not care about it, but they make it as if like the U.S. is giving foreign aid to all sorts of countries. We're involved in all sorts of things, and yet Israel has this special way of animating people in this kind of very dark and sinister way to care and get all insane about this amount of money sent to Israel when there's other, if you want to talk about waste, if you want to talk about efficiency and bureaucracy, I mean, I don't like using the word anti-Semitism lightly because it feels low resolution to throw that out and it feels like it can, wither away the term.
That sounds like a Jordan Peterson term.
I don't like using it lightly, but when you say the word, and now the rest of the episode.
Low resolution.
Congressman, I mean, I've tried talking to Democrats, and you're thank God you're here towing the line between order and chaos. So anyway, I lost it. Where were we? I blacked out in a Jordan Peterson impression. But
the foreign support.
Yeah, and that Israel in this particular way, I don't like using that, but the anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism just keeps making itself evident,
I've met those in the pro-Israel community who feel, maybe we should do away with U.S. aid to Israel because maybe that will lead to less sentiment against Israel, and I feel that's naive. Like the attempt to delegitimize and demonize Israel has nothing to do with foreign aid. It has everything to do with anti-Semitism.
Right. Yeah, it's all. They always hide. A lot of them hide behind this idea of like, it's just an aid issue. I want Israel to thrive and prosper and be victorious, of course. But there is an old school like pro-Israel position about that dating back about
because look at the encampment movements. What are they calling for? They're not simply calling for the end of U.S. aid. They're not simply calling for an end to the war. They're not simply calling for the creation of a Palestinian state. They are expressly calling for the destruction of Israel as a Jewish state.
Yeah.
So if it's not only a conversation about foreign aid, that's of secondary importance. It's a conversation about the very survival and legitimacy and existence of Israel as a Jewish state.
Yeah. Are you more forgiving to the student body versus the administrative body at these, look at these New York schools here in Columbia, like you see the administrators and faculty along with them, and the university is really the last place in which, the students look to the superiors for guidance, and all of a sudden they're told the plot, the script has been flipped. It's America and Israel's the bad guys. Ooh, so there's this lure, and I feel like they're being exploited in a lot of ways by this apparatus of faculty.
Well, there's no greater critic of the higher education industrial complex than I am. I tell people I did not graduate from Yale, Harvard, or Princeton. I graduated from the School of Common Sense. In fact, when people ask me why are you so pro-Israel, it's because I dropped out of college. But I thought the congressional hearings on anti-Semitism were revealing.
Yeah.
If you were to ask an average person here in the Bronx, is calling for a genocide of Jews harassment? Most people would tell you, of course, calling for genocide of anyone is harassment. But if you ask the same question to an academic, then what you often get is a coldly formulaic, legalistic answer. It's context dependent. And it seems to me the loss of moral common sense is not a bug, but a feature of what higher education has become.
Thanks so much for watching. If you've made it this far, we want to let you know that Ami's House is now on Patreon. We love doing extra content, bonus footage with every episode. The best way to support us is to head on over to Patreon, become a guest, and support the show for $5 a month.
If you like watching Ami cut me off, Patreon is a...
Patreon.com/Ami's House for bonus content. Thanks so much for your support, and become a guest.
For these universities within New York, like NYU and Columbia, I've been, as someone who spent his whole life either in New York or like right next to it, I've been a little bit surprised how New Yorkers have kind of tolerated it. Because like so sure on the NYU campus or the Columbia campus, but like have you been surprised at all that just people walking on the street kind of tolerate that kind of language being spoken on marches down the street?
Or like the subway? Are there
yeah, right. You saw that video on the subway where someone came in and asked if there are any Zionists here.
Mm-hmm.
As a New Yorker, I felt like pretty lonely in New York, I think the last couple of months.
Mm-hmm. Look, I feel like in a post-October 7th world, many in the Jewish community are asking, why are so few people speaking out? Why are so few people standing up? But even though it's a shock, for me, it's not surprising. Like, it's human nature to be cowardly. Like, what is special is not cowardice, but courage. What's special is not moral confusion, but moral clarity. Mm-hmm. I expect most people to be indifferent and silent in the face of hatred and anti-Semitism. What has been most disappointing is the failure of moral leadership on the part of our so-called leaders. Mm-hmm. The heads of our universities and colleges, elected officials. You even had UN Women, which is the women's rights arms of the United Nations, was silent for months about the sexual atrocities that Hamas perpetrated against Israeli women. Mm-hmm. So what has been most shocking to me is not the failure of everyday people. It's been the failure of our leadership and our institutions, from whom we should expect the most.
If anything, they've perpetuated confusion, which makes the everyday person
opposite, yeah.
not informed to say, wait, like I want to stand in solidarity, but does that mean something else? Does standing up for Israel or against anti-Semitism mean I support something else? And I attribute that to the academic apparatus that's polluted the whole language of how to talk about this issue, and it as some sort of morally equivalent conflict in some way.
I feel like what makes me unusual is not that I'm expressing views far removed from the mainstream. What makes me unusual is that I'm saying what many people are thinking, but are often too afraid to say.
Yeah, you probably get a lot of, right. I get that too when I speak out of this.
Or people quietly rooting for me, like I secretly agree with you. But
what I'm encouraged by is there is the theater of the internet, the theater of social media, and then if you poll everyday people, Sam Harris was in an interview speaking about how, if you just are looking at the Twitter feed, you think it's one perception, but 70% of the United States Americans believe Israel has the right to defend itself and defeat Hamas and should. And so there's a silent majority, I still believe, that is in the school of common sense,
The numbers are troubling.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that like Pew Research had a study showing that 70% of Americans do not even have a Twitter account.
Right.
And of those who do have a Twitter account, of those who do have a Twitter account, only a small subset are hyperactive on Twitter. But having said that, in politics, intensity is destiny, and a visible vocal minority could have far more political power than a silent majority. So even if it's a small subset of our society, a small subset can do an enormous amount of harm to an enormous number of people.
Especially when it's organized and focused over a dispersed majority that isn't, that may just want to go
I'll be
about their
blunt,
lives.
there is more intensity on the anti-Israel side than there is on the pro-Israel side.
Wow. How do we fix that? How do we shift the intensity in the right direction, besides your voice and mine and Michael's?
It's challenging because most people I know who are pro-Israel are normal people who have lives and for whom politics is secondary.
Yeah.
I think many participants in the Free Palestine movement are professional agitators and activists for whom politics is the center of their lives. And so, if you're a person who's leading a normal life with real familial commitments and you actually go to work, it's hard to match the intensity of professional agitators.
That's like the Jordan Peterson thing. I mean, being very suspicious of those
who go out there and try to change the world, but they can't clean their bloody room.
It's those people who are taking care of their inner circle first are not going to try to tackle these big issues that involve power and controlling people and controlling the narrative, because they're focused on real everyday things which are valuable to them, which is what we want, but there's a conflict.
And to your point,
Yeah.
we have to be careful not to mistake a visible vocal minority for a majority, even on college campuses. There was a study asking college students, what are the issues that matter most to you? The issue of Israel-Palestine ranked 15th on their list.
That's what Rabbi Wolpe said about Harvard. He's like, most of these kids, they just want to get a job in finance or bank, whatever. They need a good job. They want to get through school. But like you said, the intensity, that was a great line. The
Intensity is destiny.
Is destiny.
In politics.
And you have this focused intensity of these people, often very unattractive for whatever reason. I don't know what to say.
You think of one of my favorite political documents is Federalist Paper 10.
Okay, I love that one.
By James Madison,
Okay.
who warned about the dangers of factions.
Right.
But I think of the Free Palestine movement as a fanatical faction
Right.
that has hijacked progressive politics in America.
So I'm going to now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be the most like progressive woke politician in Congress, and you're going to have to try to convince me, right? So we'll do an impression session. So who do we want to do, Michael?
We'll start with Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders?
Okay,
Yeah.
we're here, ladies and gentlemen, we are here with Congressman Ritchie Torres, who supports Netanyahu's right-wing fascist government. Convince me why I'm wrong about that and why we should convince 99% of middle-class and working people of this country to support Israel.
Well, just like there's more to the United States than Donald Trump, there's more to Israel than Netanyahu or Ben-Gvir or Smotrich. You never define a whole country by its political figures. On 9/11, when the United States was attacked, I did not become a fan of George W. Bush, right? But I rallied around my country because it was under attack
Well, I
from a
didn't.
foreign enemy. So, I think when an American ally comes under attack as viciously as it did on October 7th, the focus should be on defeating the enemy, Hamas, despite whatever differences exist between the Israeli government and the American government.
So you're saying it transcends politics.
The U.S.-Israel relationship transcends politics, yes.
Mic drop, convinced. All right,
Let's
Iron
try,
Dome, let's do it.
Let's try one more. Let's do Lindsey Graham.
I don't think that conversation would actually go that way.
Probably not. That's probably not that easy. Lindsey Graham.
Oh, it's the Democratic Party run by cat ladies, as J.D. Vance would say. Congressman.
You don't have to answer that question. And RFK Jr. That one's been getting popularity.
Yes,
Unless
yeah.
you have any other requests.
No.
your favorite?
Well, I think in terms of supporting the candidate for presidency, don't worry, he loves this impression, and I would not leave him out. I think that would be wrong. But why don't you endorse my candidacy for president of the United States in 20? Oh, Pat's laughing off camera. That's fine. That's disgusting. That's ableist. Why don't you support my candidacy for president in 2024? Make the case. RFK Jr. Let's do it.
Support RFK.
You can be my vice president.
I'd rather retire from politics.
Well, okay. It must be the vaccines that made him think that way.
Okay, so we have a little fun here at Ami's house. In conclusion,
yeah, we were curious, we see all these politicians on Twitter and everything. Like when you're in D.C., you're like in the gym, hanging out with someone from the other side of the aisle. What's the dynamic? Like, what is their camaraderie? Is there friendliness? Give us some hope that between people there still is cooperation.
political personas
and,
versus actual people.
Yeah.
When I go to the gym, I typically go at night in order to avoid members.
Oh, interesting.
Most members go during the day because when I go to the gym, I'm not there to socialize. I'm there to work out.
Yeah.
And then leave.
Or coffee, cafeteria. I don't know.
No, there's far more camaraderie and collegiality than people recognize. And I remember I once spoke to an investigative journalist who said, I think poorly of members of Congress. And I simply replied, you're like the high school principal who only knows the worst students. Like the members of Congress who come to your attention represent the worst of my profession. But there's a whole universe of normal members of Congress who are there for the right reasons, who are quietly toiling away, brokering compromises on technical issues like quantum computing, whose names you will never know. And that is much more representative of the institution than the performative extremes that we see on Twitter or cable news or talk radio. And so there's far more collegiality than you would think. Having said that, the institution is malfunctioning because we've allowed the extremes to hijack Congress. But the majority of Congress, much like the majority of America, are pretty normal.
That's encouraging. I mean, it's like a microcosm of what real life is, and that the loud, focused, intensified factions get attention, get airtime, and paint this picture that isn't accurate.
But I will, even I would concede the extremes are rational actors, because if you are a political performer rather than a policymaker, there's a real incentive to be performative rather than substantive. Right, the perverse incentive structure of American politics rewards political theater. You will generate more fundraising online. Like the member of Congress who raised the most in the first quarter of 2021 was Marjorie Taylor Greene after January 6th. You will generate more publicity from cable news and talk radio. You'll have a larger following on social media, which you could monetize in a post-political career. So there's a real incentive, a real business model around the kind of performative politics that we see on the far left and on the far right.
Yeah. That's hard to get around. Maybe you should have like term limits and not have to constantly campaign all the time, but have a nice long term in which you could do what you got to do.
The issue with term limits,
tell me.
everything is subject to the law of unintended consequences, is that term limits would shift the power from the elected officials to the unelected staff, who tend to be more ideological than the elected officials.
Always got to think past phase one, but that's a hard problem to get around when political theater and that positive feedback loop rewards hot, sound bites. You get on the mic, and it really takes principled people to withstand that temptation.
I disagree with. So I read people with whom I disagree. So I disagree with like Thomas Sowell on most issues, but one quote he says is pretty wise. He said that in politics there are solutions, in economics there are trade-offs. And so I try to think in terms of trade-offs rather than solutions.
Thomas Sowell's my Rebbe, man.
Yeah.
I bring him up all the time.
Can I ask quickly what your main disagreement with him is? Because we talk about.
Oh, I'm like a liberal Democrat, and he's like a conservative Republican.
So just everything.
He also said so. There are some things so ridiculous only an intellectual would say them, which. Because his book, his critique of academics.
No, that's George Orwell. George Orwell said there are some ideas that are so stupid that only intellectuals will believe them.
So
I'm pretty sure.
Sowell is a plagiarist. No, but he wrote a book, Intellectuals in Society, in which I'm sure you would agree a lot on his critique of academia. I mean, outside of policy, there's a lot of common ground to be had about what he has to say, but he's not known as much as he should be.
No. Like if I were teaching a political science course, I have no business teaching anything. I would assign like a conflict of visions. It's a genuinely engaging.
Certainly. I miss those days when they would have these round tables of people who politically disagree but were able to have civil conversations, and everybody had similar intentions of improving things. And it feels like now that's what's kind of been lost in the public discourse. So we hope going forward that we can find ways to intensify the rational, normal people and take some of that attention away.
Amen.
And that's what we're trying to do here, Congressman Ritchie Torres.
That's what I say on my dating profile. I'm just normal.
Just normal.
Normal.
Just normal.
Just normal dude in Congress.
Final thoughts, Michael?
I just had one, just very fun question.
Fun
question. Do you ever look at other people? Do you ever just take like a day off? Just like get up late and like hang out with friends and like just like be like a normal 36-year-old guy who's not, you know what I mean?
Wrapped up in this crazy world.
Yeah, like I'm so impressed. I'm just so impressed like sitting next to you. I'm like,
I feel like the greatest cost of politics has been the loss of a personal life. Like even when I'm hanging out with friends, and I was hanging out with friends I had not seen in years, I still feel like I'm on.
Oh, interesting.
I have trouble turning it off, and every so often I need a change in scenery. But I will confess it's a real struggle for me to. And I work 7 days a week, and in the age of smartphones, there's no if you truly want to be. Actually, I have a solution to this problem.
Start keeping Sabbath.
No, exactly. I actually feel like everyone in America should practice American Shabbat.
Yeah. You can do it on Sunday if you really want to.
It would make us happy. Like, we all need some measure of digital disconnection from our lives.
For sure. People, it's very in vogue now. Wait a minute, the entire time even any call, like almost nothing unless it's an emergency. It used to be all like, that's not cool, but now it's like totally cool.
Well, that's the best part. No matter what comes up, I'm not touching the phone.
Yeah, and even not in your pocket, it's the most refreshing feeling. But you're saying though, when you see a group of friends, it's been a while, they're like, Ritchie, and you're like, how you doing? Well, we're doing everything we can to rebuild our country, our city.
No,
you're like,
it's not that glaring. But.
Yo.
Well, you have a lot.
But no, you just just feel this sense? Are you feeling like old friends are perceiving you differently, or you're just in a state of mind often that it's hard to shift?
No, yeah. Well, first, we inevitably discuss politics because it's part of my life, and people are just
curious,
intrigued by what I do for a living and what I'm thinking about the issues. And then people will stop me at the restaurant, and and then I'm on my phone because there could be an emergency that arises. So it's been a challenge for me to escape the distractions, to maintain anything resembling a normal personal life.
Right. I mean, dedicating yourself to public life, you're sacrificing, in a sense, your own personal life, unless it's really enclosed. But
like, look, I'm 36.
Yeah.
I'm single. You know, it could be because Congress is Hollywood for ugly people, but part of it is just the demands.
You're the exception.
Well, I don't know if I'm the exception, but the demands of political life has a crowding out effect.
Right. Right. And social life. I mean, I feel like in Washington too, everything is so opportunistic. The vibe is everyone is trying to I feel like even in socializing, like someone's trying to be a speechwriter for someone else. I remember picking up on that. Just like when you go to LA, it's like, people want to know what the status is of certain people, and people size people up in that way. And I feel like politically, that's the case in Washington too.
Like when I went to a gay bar in D.C. and someone screamed, "Congressman, I admire your work on the child tax credit." I'm like, please do not call me Congressman.
Oh my God. In a gay bar, they said that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can't escape it. Yeah. Well, we appreciate you taking that sacrifice.
And you're invited for Shabbos anytime.
You're invited for Shabbos.
I appreciate it.
We'll have a bunch
and my phone will be off.
We'll have a bunch of
I'll be
single
disconnected.
Jews. Phone will be off. Yeah. We'll have some good kosher food. And we'll help you out in that department.
So can you do an impersonation of me? Have you?
Yes, I can. I think so. Well, let's make
I'm not clear that I'm distinctive enough.
Well, so there's this, it's all fetal stages, but it's not distinctive in the sense that it's not like Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, much more like that. You can easily grab that. But there is this sort of measured, gentle way of speaking about issues. And I know it's not perfect because I've never done this before. So to do this in front of the person is a very rare occurrence. But I find that when I went to Israel for the first time, I realized, am I getting it? Am I getting the melody?
There's a little like Obama, like throwing
well, that's good. It's a
pinch of Obama.
A pinch of Obama. No, we'll scale it back into Ritchie Torres. And there's this very sort of gentle, calm, measured thing happening. So I'm getting a little bit of the pace.
Yeah, you got
and the
pace.
tempo. And then there's the smile that always comes up after. And now, none of it's perfect, but especially when people who you're doing are watching you, so that's always a little strange. But Congressman Ritchie Torres. I try to wrap episodes with impressions of the subject, but I don't know. You'd have to have other people watching.
I put you on the spot, so.
You put me on the spot, and
it was respectable.
There's always a positive smile as you're. Hey, there it is, Michael. You see it?
Yeah.
Did you catch it? Yeah. There it is.
You got the vibe. We got it.
I got the vibe.
Work on the voice.
I got the vibe. When it's sculpting, so I basically have this. Yeah. I have to. Donald Trump used to kind of sound a little more like that, but eventually I got the lips, and I got that. So it's going to be 2024, crazy time.
Who is your favorite person to impersonate?
I guess it depends on the day. I do love a good, when I'm channeling Jordan Peterson or Trump or my grandfather, who's no longer with us. That was a good one. My grandfather I used to do it for my parents. He's a Holocaust survivor. He's a very special man. One of my first impressions was doing him, Michael's favorite is my Zadie. But, these days, Kamala Harris has been on fire on TikTok when I just throw a Kamala Harris impression. We are going to do everything we can to not only sit on the couch, but also on the chair. But I'm enjoying that one, too, because there's not that many women in my roster that I can do range-wise. But anyway, so I leave it to the fans to decide who their favorite one is. I know you like the Jordan Peterson at Home Depot.
It's quite good, yeah.
Well, that's...
But I actually love the Home Depot employee.
Oh, yes.
I think the comedy
makes accent, right?
That was very good.
He's kind of a Home Depot. You're going to the... Well, and he gets at the end.
At the end, it was...
Yeah, and he was like, well, actually, it's a fine line between order and chaos, and you must find your way between the archetypes of the different kinds of people in the subject matters of the genesis of our species. Okay, well, that's really something. Congressman Ritchie Torres, thank you so much
for being here
at Ami's house. We appreciate you.
Thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it.
It's Ami's house and Ritchie's house.
Ami's house and Ritchie's house. Joining forces. Here we go. We'll do it again.